In 2005, horror gaming was changed forever. A game released featuring over-the-shoulder shooting, fast-moving monsters infected with parasites, action set-pieces to rival any big-budget movie, and it was a smash hit. The fixed camera angle style of survival horror popularized by Resident Evil was relegated to the dustbin of history practically overnight, replaced with a template AAA games are still using today. From Dead Space to Chronos: The New Dawn, you can see its legacy stretching back decades, as though it emerged fully formed and perfect all the way back in 2005.
Vincent, one more thing.
Yeah?
You need to...
This is not that game. Hey everyone, I've got a question. If Resident Evil 4 is the first of the new guard, then what was the last of the old? There are probably several contenders for the title, but I would argue the best of them is Cold Fear. At least from the ones I've played anyway. It's always subject to change. Haunting Ground and Rule of Rose probably blow it out of the water, but that's not really the point of this video, is it? Developed by Darkworks Game Development Studio, it tells a tale of horror on the high seas as you fight to escape a ghost ship infested with monsters before a storm sends the lot of you down to Davy Jones' locker. It's a game almost precision engineered to be a cult classic, and it was way better than I remembered it being. A lot of that comes down to playing it on PC through last year's GOG re-release over my original PS2 copy, which I still have by the way. Quote, not for supply in the UK, end quote. Oh no. Any UK viewers, just scroll down to the comments for a second. Damn it, how do I get it off the screen? Fuck! Shit. But even beyond actually having the ability to aim properly this time around, I was surprised at how well it holds up. There's a not entirely unjustified belief that survival horror had grown stagnant by 2005, that Resident Evil 4 shook the genre out of its funk, and brought it blasting into the 21st century, but Cold Fear proved there was still life left in the original interpretation. It's the last of the classics, released just 2 months after the genre was transformed forever. A swan song for AAA fixed camera angles, tank controls, and 90s survival horror cheese. And it's a game I've been wanting to cover for years, so let's talk about it. But before I get my hands into the guts of this game, there are going to be spoilers throughout, so this is your only warning. Anyway, let's get to it. This is Cold Fear. Cold Fear isn't just the last of the classics from the golden age of survival horror games, it's also the last gasp in an odd trend of maritime horror media released between the late 1980s and early 2000s. You had The Meg by Stephen Alton in bookshops, bangers like Deep Rising and Virus, and dogshit like Sphere and Ghost Ship in the cinemas. Even Mulder and Scully got in on the trend in at least one episode of The X-Files.
The service on this ship is terrible, Scully.
Hell, this isn't even the first video game to dive into the subgenre. Deep Fear and S.O.S. both beat it to the punch by years, and Resident Evil jumped aboard a cruise liner twice before Cold Fear hit store shelves. It's also a subgenre very close to my heart, something I get into more detail about in my Virus franchise retrospective, a project that, as of this video's publication, is not yet out, so look forward to that in 6 months. But in the interest of not cannibalizing my own material again, suffice it to say, I love this shit. It's got a very rigid formula, they all do the same fucking thing, and I eat it up every single time. I love ghost ships getting tossed back and forth in a storm, and deep sea facilities looming out of the darkness, and oil rigs choked beneath ropes of alien flesh, and strange monsters thrown together from the ocean's weirdest little guys, and humanity's worst impulses. These days it has definitely sunk a bit in popularity, but we still usually get at least one high-profile example of the subgenre every decade in some medium or another. Soma, Still Wakes the Deep, and Stasis Bone Totem are more recent examples of gaming maritime horror, and they all start the exact same way as the classics. Everything is fine, everyone's just going about their day, doing their job, maybe there's a hint of something more sinister lurking in the cold open, and then it all goes wrong. The characters are cut off from the mainland, the boat or the the rig or the deep sea facility becomes a closed circle from which they must escape while under attack from some monstrous presence. Usually one of them gets infected, the setting gets more and more run down as the story goes on, and it ends with a boss fight against a big goofy puppet before the survivors are helicoptered home under clear blue skies. Or they just die amidst the carnage. One of the two. Take your pick. It's formulaic, but it works, so it's honestly shocking how badly coldfear fumbles things the second you hit new game. One of the reasons I was so surprised at how much I enjoyed coldfear is that it makes a terrible first impression. Indeed, it's a game I've only ever completed in a single sitting, because stepping away after the opening cinematic to let things stew for a bit always left me with no motivation to keep on playing whenever I did try to stretch it out across a couple of days. Because while it does technically follow the formula, in a way that's not even too bad on paper, it does so without any respect for pacing or atmosphere, and for horror media, that's just inexcusable. But then, it's not really going for horror, is it? The opening cinematic begins with a team of Special Forces operatives boarding a ghost ship in the middle of a storm, somewhere in the Bering Strait. The place seems abandoned, but there must be something on board worth risking the weather to retrieve, and it finds them pretty quick. The team doesn't last a minute on deck before they're slaughtered by some sort of horrible goop monster, and their CIA handler has no choice but to call in reinforcements to secure the ship.
Damn it, Hernandez. Talk to me. What's going on? I'm not getting anything here. Marcus. Law. Can you hear me?
Enter Tom Hansen, member of the US Coast Guard and crewman aboard the Ravenswood, which just so happens to be close to the ghost ship. He strikes a cool pose with the rest of the crew, and off we go. And if that felt abrupt, when we fade back in, Tom is standing alone on the side of the ship. There's some banter over the radio between the rest of the crew, just enough to learn their names, before the lot of them are also slaughtered, this time off screen.
Hear what? What's that smell? These old Russian whalers all stink to high heaven. What's that? Open fire! Open fire! Holy shit! Ah! I'm falling back! Reform on my position! I repeat, reform here!
Lieutenant Lansing, come in, come in!
And as for the Ravenswood, the storm forces it away, and it's never mentioned again.
Boarding party, this is the Ravenswood. The seas are too rough. We're gonna have to head back. You're on your own, people. You heard the man. Keep it tight.
There, that's the intro. Have fun. So this sucks, and in so many ways I'm not even sure where to begin. I guess I'll start with the obvious. It's just noise. You're given so much information, but none of it is actually helpful or relevant to setting the scene. The game just throws names at you like they're a proper substitute for characterization. Kenneth, Marcus, Law, Hernandez, Hansen, DeSantos, Friedman, Lansing, Walker, the Ravenswood, but I don't know who any of these people are. The team of Special Forces operatives are all kitted out in the same uniform, and the crew of the Ravenswood may as well be invisible. I wouldn't be surprised if the three guys hanging out behind Hansen in the cinematics share his model, and are just framed in silhouette to hide it. We're introduced to 11 people, 9 of whom are dead or gone before the end of the 3-minute opening, and of the 2 characters who are going to stick around, we learn nothing. In fact, despite getting buried under a pile of names, CIA Mans is like the only one we don't hear, nor do you learn the name of the whaler you've been sent to recover. It's only ever referenced in the manual. You see what I mean? It's all just noise, and it all goes by so fast. There's no attempt to build intrigue or atmosphere. The editing is too abrupt for that, both before and after the game gives you control of Hansen. There's a little mystery as to why the CIA would brave the storm to secure the ship as soon as possible, but that's about as good as it gets. Actually picking out what's going to be relevant is next to impossible. coldfear opens like one of those pre-rendered trailers that only exist to drum up hype without showing anything substantial, and for all I know, it actually does, because this cinematic was indeed used in the game's marketing. All they did was change the aspect ratio and cut off the title card at the end to make it flow better. But the most frustrating thing is coldfear does understand how to build intrigue intrigue and tension because the mechanical introduction is nothing but the ship is deserted, the lights are off, the storm drowns out all sound on deck. And inside, the place is eerily quiet. Something clearly happened before you got on board. There's evidence of violence just about everywhere you look. You're being watched from the shadows, being hunted. You're not alone here, but the first enemy you face isn't some monster, or even one of the original crew, but the storm itself. Coldfear understands how lethal the ocean can be when Poseidon gets angry. There are dumpers smashing over the railings that can drain half your health in one hit. Loose lifeboats and rigging whip back and forth in the wind with enough force to scatter your insides across the deck. The storm's even got its claws into the frame rate, holy shit. The way the environment pitches and rolls beneath you does such a great job of showing just how bad the storm is. Like, yeah, no shit the Ravenswood had to retreat from that. Tom even gets a semblance of an actual character given he's bilingual. You can translate the Russian signage into English by aiming at the words, which is a fun way to integrate characterization into mechanics. It doesn't last, of course. It's not long before you catch up with what's left of the crew, but they're not zombies. They're regular humans just trying to survive. Even so, they're not taking any chances with Tom. They start blasting the second he introduces himself, and you're given no choice but to take them down. From their dialogue, it's clear they're running from something other than the US Coast Guard, and there are hints of that around below deck. Weird animals draped across operating tables in the dark, a corpse stripped down to the bone up on the bow, a document talking about something called an exocell the star of Sakhalin oil rig unearthed while drilling for black gold. Whatever it is, the Russians are so spooked they open fire the second they see anything upright and moving. Things get even worse once you reach the crew quarters. There are bodies torn to pieces strewn across the beds, and not all of them appear to be dead.
Oh, man. At least I found the code. Help me! Holy!
It's a clever trick Coldfear pulls here, or it would be if not for the fact Resident Evil 4 beat it across the finish line, but regardless of who won the gold on changing up the rhythms of survival horror gameplay, it's still a fun subversion of expectations. Starting enemies in survival horror games, especially zombies, tend to be pretty slow. You're given this long narrow corridor to aim down, plenty of space to paint your target without risk of it jumping to the side, but then it just clears the distance in half a second, like holy shit, it's right on top of you. And even on normal, it hits like a truck. It's a very clear message that this isn't just going to be another classic Resident Evil clone. This isn't survival horror. Like a Dino Crisis before it, this is panic horror. When you leave the crew quarters, the ship has been transformed into a battlefield. There are zombies everywhere, too many for the handful of survivors to deal with. They're forced into hiding, or trapped in place for reasons you don't yet understand.
Stupid son of a whore! When I get on the hill, I'll kill you!
While the infected are out in force, they're swarming the deck, smashing through doors, bursting back to life when moments ago they were lying dead on the ground. The situation is fucked. The rest of the Coast Guard are long dead. The Ravenswood has been forced back by the storm. There's nowhere for you to go, and nothing for you to do but survive. There's a lot to unpack about the plot here, but I want to save that for a broader discussion on the story once we know what the hell is actually going on. Rearrange a few things, and I I could see it working really well, but as it is, it's a very clunky start, which is why I wanted to present it as it happens on a blind playthrough. It's one half of the reason I can't play the game over multiple sessions. It's only once the monsters show up that coldfear really finds its sea legs, and for a title released right at the end of the golden age of survival horror, it's pretty good at what it does, but that comes with a couple of massive caveats. It certainly helps that Darkworks has some experience with the genre. Back at the turn of the millennium, they released Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare, a title that mostly sought to copy Resident Evil, rather than reinvigorate the series that codified the survival horror style, and it's rough. Between the broken puzzles and the respawning enemies, the only thing I really remember about it is how dummy thick the leading lady is, like god damn. But that game is a topic for another day. I mostly bring it up now because Darkworks clearly learned a lot of lessons about how to make a survival horror title from their time with The New Nightmare. I remember that game being a sprawling mess of rooms and corridors that had you pinballing all over the place in search of what to do, wasting ammo on the 10,000 spindly assholes that respawned across the journey to complete the most rudimentary of puzzles. Coldfear's environments, by comparison, are still sprawling, but a lot tighter in terms of layout. The ship especially is a series of densely packed areas connected by looping shortcuts that you slowly pry open until you have access to just about the whole boat. Probably the most successful trick Coldfear pulls in terms of level design is that it feels like it could be a real whaling ship. The corridors feel appropriately narrow, walkways and side rooms feel like they make sense for where they are, all the little details like the harpoon gun on the prow and the butcher's block feel right, and feel is the operative word there. The bowels of the ship become a lot more video gamey, with massive abstract chambers, traps suspended over open fires you can lure enemies into, and weird science fiction stasis pods locked away in cold storage. But they don't come off as out of place because the upper decks put in the effort to make the environment feel lived in and believable. The ship is big enough that it makes sense infected or survivors could be hiding elsewhere without you knowing about it, but not so big that it becomes a bastard to traverse. I think that might be why there's no in-game map. When you actually look at the layout as it's presented in the manual, the whole place becomes much smaller. It's not just the vibe of the environment that's right either, it's the pacing of how you move through it too. I often felt The New Nightmare struggled to convey to the player where you're meant to go next, at least based off the decade-old memories of my time with it, and some of that definitely remains in Coldfear too, but it's nowhere near as bad. I did get stuck here after the introduction of the zombies looking for the radio room, but the section of the ship I had access to was small enough overall that I was able to find my way to it pretty quickly. It only set me back about 10-15 minutes, and most of that was spent in combat anyway. Plus, if you do go the wrong way, Tom will chime in with a "this way, idiot," to put you on the right track.
This looks like the wrong way.
That's the first of the caveats I mentioned. Rather than improve what didn't work about The New Nightmare's take on survival horror, Darkworks leaned into what did. Puzzles are one aspect of the formula that have been left behind completely. The most you ever need to do is find a keycard, shoot a fuse box, or if you're feeling really spicy, hit a button and run through a door before it closes. And that last one isn't even necessary to finish the game. It's entirely optional. Yet it still retains the usual survival horror spread of notes and documents, only without the need for puzzle hints. All they can now provide the player are backstory and awkward in-universe tutorials on how the mechanics work. Quote, "According to witnesses, Corporal Lagai had replaced his electronic key while on duty. Unable to reach his official post, he promptly fired at the electrical control box on door 114, causing it to explode. Exposed live wiring subsequently came into contact with a pool of water on the floor. The door opened, however Corporal Lagai was electrocuted." No follow-up necessary, end quote. It is funny how mean the game is about the fuse box mechanic though. You find one before you're introduced to your first zombie, and before you even encounter a save point, so there's nothing to do but explore. The first one you find on the side of the ship, away from the water, but the second is located in a flooded area below deck that is more than happy to let you walk into a soft lock if you decide to try shooting it early. I figured it would electrocute the water, which is why I got out of the way, but I wasn't expecting it to keep electrifying the water, leaving me with no escape, and since the game features no checkpoints, I had to restart the run from scratch. Lesson learned. Don't fuck with water and electricity. Don't fuck with water at all, in fact. That is about as cruel as coldfear gets with its environmental hazards though. It's a game that wants you to keep moving forward, which might be why there's no inventory management either, with the bare exception of the fact you can't pick up ammunition for weapons you don't have, which, I have to say, it's pretty shit. But yes, despite having a non-linear environment, the way you move through it is actually pretty straightforward, which helps keep the tension high. Even just moving across deck can get pretty intense when you're trying to keep your feet planted firmly on the grating. Does it toe a little too far over the line into straight-up action? Maybe, but if it does, that only serves to make the horror elements that do remain shine all the brighter. Much as I hate the opening cinematic, it does create a tone of action thriller, so when the game slows down to let you soak in the gory details of the situation, it does hit harder than I think a slower, more methodical, more traditional survival horror game would. There's a reason why horror set pieces in non-horror games tend to be among the most effective. An unexpected shift in tone can work way better than if you go into a piece of media expecting to be scared. It's why the regenerator set piece toward the end of Resident Evil 4 works so well. That's not action horror, that's just horror. And there are moments of cold fear that are no different, like this charnel house you stumble into after a run of action set pieces. So there's some decent exploration and a bunch of environmental interaction, but the real focus is on the combat. Thankfully, the rate of enemy respawns has been lowered from the new Nightmare, but it hasn't gone away completely. Most new enemy spawns are triggered by progressing the plot, but sometimes a zombie will just jump out at you while you're backtracking through an older area. But because progression is a lot more linear, and you have less reason to go running in circles through other parts of the ship to complete puzzles, it's less of an issue in Cold Fear than it was in Darkworks' previous attempt at survival horror. Indeed, the game is linear enough that it forgoes the save systems of the classics in favour of just giving you the prompt whenever you make enough progress. A bit like Dino Crisis actually, but unlike that game, Cold Fear only offers the prompt once, which is weird because it still features save rooms, complete with save room themes. You just can't save your progress in them. There are two kinds even, infirmaries and armories, where you can stock up on health or ammo respectively. They do run out of supplies eventually, so you can't rely on them forever, which was the right call given this is meant to be a horror game. But either way, it's so weird to see this key aspect of the genre reduced to a vestigial organ. The second, far worse caveat is that everything I just said only applies to the part of the game set aboard the Eastern Spirit. The second you jump ship, all of the new Nightmare's worst impulses start creeping back in. You might end up doing roughly the same amount of stuff on the oil rig in the second half of the game as you do on the ship in the first, but that density of level design disappears between loading screens. Everything is so much bigger, and every area is so much further away from all the others, to the point that even with the occasional shortcut, it still takes forever to get around. And all the environmental hazards that give the game such a striking personality, the storm tossing the ship back and forth, the waves crashing on deck, the wind sending the rigging to the minus dimension, that mostly goes away. The game becomes a forgettable run of catwalks, corridors, and underwater tunnels that, while still pretty straightforward, are just not as fun to play through. The back half of the game is so forgettable, in fact, that coming back to Cold Fear, I remembered only two things about it. One of them being how fucked the final boss was, and not even the janky specifics, just that I had a terrible time with it when I first finished the game. The other I'll save for for when we come to it, but suffice to say, overall, Coldfear is a mixed bag as a survival horror title. Darkworks definitely learned from the mistakes of the new Nightmare, but their fixes often chafe against the genre as it was in 2005. It's a game caught between the slower, exploration-based puzzle box style of the 90s and the linear, combat-focused action horror titles that would crash onto shore in the wake of Resident Evil 4, not really fitting neatly into either category. The way the ship opens up after your first encounter with the infected is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. The environment is just big enough that it feels like you should have multiple avenues of exploration, but you don't. You need to get into the radio room, which is located up by the bridge, but the door is locked with a key located down below in the fish hold. Technical term, I assume, which is itself locked. You need a valve to even open the door, one you'll find pretty quickly if you follow the carnage around the front deck, assuming you don't get your head taken off by this hook along the way. But with so many enemies now running around, each with their own little set-piece moments, it can be hard to tell if you're headed in the right direction or not. The fish hold, we're really calling it that, is down here with the soft lock fuse box, away from all the violence, somewhere you may not even know exists if you didn't happen to head downstairs on your first trip through the boat. It's not quite one of those shocking moments of horror hidden amongst the action, if only because it was all over the game's marketing, but it comes pretty close. There's an orca spread out on a butcher's block with its guts spread out all over the floor, and the radio room key is right next to its mouth. I wonder what's going to happen when I pick it up.
Son of a bitch!
These are the exocells mentioned in the document we found earlier, and if this game hadn't been made alongside Resident Evil 4, I'd almost be pointing some fingers. Slippery little guys that pop out to finish the fight when you blow a zombie's head off? That's kind of familiar. Now I don't want to spend this whole video comparing Coldfear to Resident Evil 4, because that's a fight this game is always going to lose. There's no contest between the two. But come on, do you think the guys at Darkworks came up with the design and were really happy with it, and then RE4 previews started popping up and they were like, ah, merde. Because they're French. As if you couldn't tell. Now I'll throw Coldfear a bone here, because the exocells do have some mechanical differences from RE4's Las Plagas, but let's save that for now. With the key to the radio room in hand, you can finally... Oh, on the bridge, Tom makes contact with the outside world, but it's not the rescue he may have been hoping for.
Bravo, 7-9er, can you hear me?
Who am I speaking to? Where's Lansing?
Lansing's dead. This is Hansen. Everyone else is down.
Bloody hell. Then I guess we're stuck with each other, Hansen, but you're not the only survivor. There's still a very dangerous man loose on that ship. Colonel Dmitry Yusupov. He needs to answer a few questions. Round him up, and then we'll get you out of there.
Who's we?
I'm CIA Special Agent Bennett, Mr. Hansen. Patch this frequency through your headset. You might need my help. Bennett, out.
Great. Just great.
Bennett is the CIA handler who had a blink and you'll miss it cameo in the opening cinematic, something you'd already know if you read the manual. Quote, Agent Bennett has been watching Yusupov for a long time, patiently, like a spider in the center of its web. He has been waiting for his chance to unravel the mystery, no matter how many lives he sacrifices to do so. End quote. So, I think he might be evil, I don't know, call it a hunch? What I find funny is that Dmitry Yusupov himself doesn't actually have an entry in the cast of characters. In fact, he's barely a character at all. So Bennett's bio? Yet more brain poison that exists only to confuse the player. This is Yusupov's only reference in the manual. What the fuck are you talking about? It makes it seem like the two have some long and bitter rivalry, but Yusupov doesn't seem to know that Bennett even exists. And if he does, he doesn't last long enough to tell Tom. The second you meet him, he throws a spear gun at Tom's head, except not really, you still have to pick it up after the cutscene, spouts some cryptic bullshit, and then dies instantly when an exocell pops out of his chest like a really shit jack-in-the-box, something they don't do at any other point in the game.
Здравствуйте.
Speak English. It doesn't matter now.
What's going on here, Colonel?
A terrible mistake. Find Anna. She has answers.
Where is she?
Locked up for protection after that idiot Captain Lubensky hid in the cold storage. Now here, take this experimental. The bolts are chemically treated to distract them. It may save your life.
So yeah, another nothing character who did not need to be in the game, whose importance to the plot was clearly telegraphed by his almost complete absence from the story section of the manual, but at least he gives you a proper goal.
Mother of God, Bennett, you would not believe what I just saw.
Easy there. I heard it all. You need to go find Captain Lubensky. Pronto.
But this girl, Anna...
Is probably just some Russian hooker Yusupov had on board.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this guy is bad news. I'm still not convinced though.
Yusupov said she had answers. I'd like a few of them.
You and me fucking both. Reading through Yusupov's diary does add some much needed context to what's going on at least. He and the rest of the Russians are working for some sort of cartel, and they're not interested in scientific discoveries. They are, however, interested in how exocells might be applied in combat, hence why Drs. Kamsky and Bakarev were brought on board to make the deadly parasite monsters even deadlier. He's not an idiot about it though. He does have the two scientists working on ways to combat the exocells. Quote, protecting yourself from your own weapons is an old, often life-saving instinct, end quote. They haven't quite cracked a cure or a vaccine yet, but they have produced a deterrent to distract the little fuckers while you get your bearings in combat. The spear gun isn't really something you'll need until the late game, at least on normal, but it's nice to have. Now, we technically already know where Anna is, but the door back through to that part of the ship is busted, which means Tom's headed down into the guts of the whaler, where reality unfolds from a believable lived-in space into something more abstract and silly. And also, this happens. Fucking rancid. But at least the cutscene teaches you a very important lesson. Uninfected corpses are no longer something you can safely ignore. Up until now, the fact the infected melt away to nothing upon death and dropped Russian mercenaries persist was just a fun little detail, but now it serves a mechanical purpose. The second an exocell spawns in, it'll start searching out the nearest corpse to transform it into a zombie, and the lower decks are fucking swarming with both. Out of place as the drawbridge is in this otherwise pretty naturalistic environment though, it is undeniably fun to drop the bastards into the engine. Okay, we're back here. Anna is just through the door and up the stairs. Oh, that's not good.
Anna?
Who are you? What are you doing here?
My name is Tom Hansen. I'm a friend.
Why should I believe you?
Because I'm here and you're not dead.
Ha, funny. Where is Dmitri?
Yusupov's dead.
Good. The bastard deserved it.
So can you tell me what the hell is going on here? He said you had some answers.
He lied. I don't have answers.
Then who does?
Papa does. We can radio him. He will know what to do. I think you and I are linked, Hansen. We will both make it through this, or neither of us will.
I vote for both.
Okay, what is going on with the pre-rendered cinematics? Every single one of them is edited like the devs were on a time limit. The dialogue isn't given room to breathe. The atmosphere isn't given any time to build. The game's just rushing through them as quickly as possible, like it's embarrassed of its own story. The only one with any actual pacing has been the one that introduced the exocell infection mechanic, and even that one fucked the mood with its use of clownsplat.wav. What I don't get is that the in-game cutscenes aren't like that. They do have pacing. They do let the characters breathe between lines of dialogue.
Hansen, I've got an idea on the girl. She's Viktor Kamsky's daughter. It is vital that you keep her alive.
Oh, now you want her alive? I can't blame Bennett, honestly. At least Anna has a gesture toward a personality, built entirely of cliches, but given the alternatives are nothing but piles of soggy cardboard, I'll fucking take it. She's your typical strong-willed Russian woman who butts heads with the all-American hero, but still ends up falling for him by the end, or something. The notes and documents do attempt to flesh out her character, but it's still surface level stuff. Yusupov describes her as a, quote, real Russian woman, end quote, and had her locked up aboard the Eastern Spirit to ensure the cooperation of her father, Viktor Kamsky. She's had a hard life, by her father's admission, and all the horrible things he's done for Yusupov while experimenting on the exocells has been for her benefit. But that doesn't really tell us anything about her. That's mostly about him. Oh, there's gotta be something here. What does the manual have to say about her? Quote, rebellious and strong-willed, she finds herself forced to make an impossible decision if she wants to survive. End quote. Wrong. Let's move on. Now, seeing this, you might think I'm about to start pointing fingers and bring up that other game again, but coldfear isn't interested in being an escort mission. It only lasts as long as it takes to reach the radio. Jesus fucking Christ, that scared the shit out of me. I'm gonna need a fucking moment, holy shit. That's one of the frustrating things about coldfear. It often mistakes loud jump scares for actual horror. It's a crutch the game leans on time and again, and sometimes it works, like here, and sometimes it doesn't, like the orca back in the fish hold. Now, jump scares aren't always cheap. I think they can be earned if you put in the effort to set the mood and build up to them so that they act as a catharsis, a release of tension rather than a slap to the face out of nowhere. But coldfear doesn't really understand the difference, which is frustrating because all the pieces are there to make something genuinely terrifying. A storm-tossed whaling ship is a fantastic setting for a maritime horror title, one especially well suited to video games because having to film multiple scenes in those conditions for a movie would be expensive and exhausting, whereas once the ship and the storm are built in engine, the hard part's done. You're free to use it as much as you like, and coldfear gets its money's worth out of the Eastern Spirit. It looks great, it's all very kinetic and vibrant, and the storm keeps the visual imperfections hidden behind a wall of sea spray, or at least it tries. The physics-enabled rigging is possessed by demons, and they will come out if you stick around to watch the cable whip back and forth in the wind, a bug the remaster couldn't remove even with all the GOG team's arcane coding knowledge, though like a lot of physics bugs, it may be related to the frame rate, so who knows. Even then, it's funny, and it doesn't detract from the overall look of the game. coldfear's visual design wasn't really anything to write home about in 2005, probably to free up space for all the moving environmental elements on the disc, but 20 years later it has a retro charm that I'll never not love. I'd forgotten how detailed it was too. The ship is cluttered both inside and out, and that helps sell the thing as a place where people lived and worked and died, rather than a sequence of rooms in a video game. You wouldn't find rats hiding in the storage rooms if Darkworks weren't interested in making the Eastern Spirit as believable a ship as they could make with the technology of the time. The way it uses colour to make the horror elements pop is really clever too. Most of the ship is painted in cool blues or greys, so when you come across a wall splattered with blood, or a hallway bathed in red emergency lighting, or an infected with glowing eyes, it sticks out. Again, it's only when you venture down into the engines that it leans too hard into abstract video game spaces and breaks the illusion, something unfortunately continued across the second half of the game on the oil rig. Don't get me wrong, the detail remains. I love these spooky abandoned laboratories and aquarium tunnels, but they're clearly video game spaces first and lived-in places second. Part of that comes down to scale. The Star of Sakhalin is extremely open for an oil rig, even in places that you'd expect to be cramped, like the habitation module, which just gives the whole place a sort of Max Payne vibe, where only the abstract impression of an environment is preserved in gameplay. It's got a much more inconsistent colour palette too. The blues and greys often get pushed aside by warmer yellows and greens, like it's trying to cosplay as Big Shell from Metal Gear Solid 2, and so there's less of a contrast with the red of the gore when it does still pop up. Because the rig is anchored in place, there's less less chance to involve the storm too. Though the water effects don't go away completely, which might be a positive to some if you're prone to motion sickness, though I was surprised to discover coldfear has pretty good sea legs when it comes to the camera. It's a weird mix of fixed camera angles and over-the-shoulder coverage, a bit like the early Silent Hill games, but it doesn't really pitch and roll with the ship. It always stays anchored in place behind Tom Hansen's head. Even then, the movement of the ship more or less vanishes the second you step inside, which I think is why most of the fixed camera angles are saved for the interiors, and they're fine. coldfear does make good use of its three-dimensional environment in the cinematography. There are some fun dynamic angles as things start falling apart, as the storm tries to sweep Tom right off the side of the deck, but I've definitely seen them used better. There are so many ways framing can be used to build tension and atmosphere in horror titles, but coldfear feels oddly restrained in that regard, like it's scared too much movement between the camera and the environment and Tom Hansen will make the player vomit all over the controller. And maybe Darkworks was right to be scared of that, I don't know. I don't usually get motion sickness playing games. The last two titles that had me reaching for a bucket were Aliens vs Predator 2010 and B-Movie. That's not a joke. I do vaguely remember my original PS2 playthrough was a bit overwhelming given the weaker hardware and clunkier controls, but I never had to stop playing because of it. Ultimately, it was probably the right call, but I do wish the interior fixed camera angles had a little more style to them. As it is, they're just functional, which might also be to make the jump to an over-the-shoulder angle whenever you hit the button to aim down sights less jarring, because holy shit, that switch can give you whiplash. But I don't know. I still think they could have done more with it. This bit where something tries to smash in the door to the fish hold should be a great moment of horror, but instead I was left completely lost as to where the noise was even coming from because the over-the-shoulder view can't give it proper focus like a fixed angle could. One thing that is at least consistent across the whole game is the lighting. There's a good distinction between electric lights and natural fire, even if the latter does look a little scuffed. There are some parts of the game that are extremely dark, and Tom's torch is good enough to cut through the gloom, but only when you aim down sights. The rest of the time he practices torch etiquette and keeps that shit off. And I'm kind of torn on that, because it does interrupt some of the more atmospheric fixed camera angles the game has to offer, but on the other hand, it does mean you'll always get a good look at the enemies. And they look pretty good. The grey skin and glowing eyes set the infected apart from the human mercenaries you fight across the game, but even by 2005, it was hard to make zombies interesting from a visual design perspective. Making them fast as fuck and giving them some creepy animations adds a little personality, but what really brings them together is the gore. The way heads pop is so crunchy and satisfying, and then when you add how exocells come rolling out the neck hole to continue the fight, it's perfect. The exocells might have the most personality out of any of the enemies, including the final boss, mostly because they're just facehuggers with half the fingers missing. There's something just very off-putting about the way they move and how far they can reach. The way they go ball mode when shot is a nice touch too. There are some special infected who pop up in the second half of the game too, the Charger from Left 4 Dead 2, Mr. Invisible, and to quote my notes, slippery golem fuckers. But they're all pretty basic designs, even for the time. coldfear might predate Left 4 Dead 2 by half a decade, but Resident Evil Code Veronica X had been out for years by 2005, and what's this enemy? And as for the actual characters, they're pretty crunchy. Tom and Anna look pretty good, even if they walk like they're in desperate need of a bathroom, but Lansing seems to be missing half his textures. Yusupov may well be a generic corpse with a JPEG of a fancy coat slapped on him, and Pavel appears to have been given Viktor Kamsky's model with a hair transplant if his character bio in the manual is any indication. Tom and Anna went through a ton of different looks during development, so believe me when I tell you, it could have been so much worse. But their final designs don't really give them any personality either, they're pretty generic. Thankfully, the voice acting does add a lot of character back in. Everyone seems to know exactly what sort of cheesy B-movie horror story they're in, and make the most of what few lines of dialogue they all have. Hansen has the most voice lines, and the actor throws himself into every single one of them.
No way I'm getting up those stairs.
The rest of the sound design is fine, if you can actually hear it over the music. The storm is great. That thunder goes through you like a fucking bomb. And the sound of the waves crashing over the deck does a lot to elevate the otherwise crunchy visual elements. The big explosions in general are a lot of fun. And so are the gore effects. The pops and squelches, not that one. It's all very chunky and tactile. You love to hear it. The audio design on the weapons is pretty good too. It reminds me a lot of The Thing, actually. A lot of the sound effects do. Though the weird chirping they gave the exocells does feel a little out of place. The music is more of a mixed bag. The main theme sounds better suited to something like a Tom Clancy game than a horror title. The safe room that isn't actually a safe room theme sounds a little more genre appropriate, but it's not a track you'll often get to hear. Mostly you'll get hit with action themes, even when there are no enemies to fight. And then there are the tracks that jackknife straight into Clown World, like this one that sounds like enemies are fucking through the pipes. Or this one from the oil rig, which samples some of the raptor vocalizations from Jurassic Park, and I cannot fucking tell you how tilted that made me the first time I heard it. Elmo? One of the game's bigger selling points was related to the music actually, given Marilyn Manson allowed Darkworks to include his single Use Your Fist and Not Your Mouth on the soundtrack. Look, it even made it on the box, UK viewers close your eyes. And to give you an idea of how much of a Marilyn Manson fan I am, I couldn't pick it out from any other track in the game. I'm not even sure if it made it into the remaster given how fucked music licensing is in the gaming industry. But yeah, I'm not Grimbeard, this isn't my scene. Though I do know putting Marilyn Manson on the box these days, it's probably way less of a draw than it was back in 2005, which is probably why the GOG store page makes no mention of him at all. But yeah, overall, not bad, but not really fitting for a horror game either. Alright, I think I'm good, let's keep going. So yeah, you only have to escort Anna a few rooms, probably because I don't think the enemies can see her. The few that popped out along the way all went straight for Tom, even when Anna ran ahead of him. They just don't seem to give a shit about her. And if that is why the escort mission is so short, I'm not going to complain because she is a little too slow for my liking. Though you don't actually need her to keep up with you to make progress, so, you know, swings and roundabouts. Her frightened pose is very funny though, like what the fuck is that? She looks like she's ready to wrestle a crocodile, or hit the beach. Wait, is that raptor still hanging around? There we go. Returning to the radio room, we're treated to another pre-rendered cinematic that from its opening moments I thought might finally slow down to let the scene breathe a little. But no, it's the fastest yet.
Here's the radio room.
Good. We can call the drilling platform my father works on. Star of Sakhalin, can you hear me?
Anna, is that you?
Pavel, what's happening? Where's my father?
I'm sorry, he is missing. And this place. Don't come back, Anna. It's too dangerous.
Hush, I am coming back and I'm bringing help.
Then I will try to hold out until you return. Das Vidanya.
We can't turn the ship. The autopilot is locked.
Then unlock it!
Good idea. I'll go find Lubensky. You stay here. Lock the doors. And here, put this on.
What is it?
It's a radio. It will let us keep in touch. Just wipe it off first.
And it gets worse when you step outside.
Okay, Hansen, here's the plan. You find the codes you need to unlock the autopilot. Point that thing at the oil rig Anna's talking about and get her father out of there.
If we turn this thing broadside to the storm, the waves are gonna swamp us!
Like, didn't you just agree with Anna to go to the rig? Oh, and I love Pavel just folding like a deck chair the second Anna tells him she's coming back. This is narrative jank delivered at shit anime dub speeds, and I cannot keep up. So much is happening, and none of it fucking matters. And for some reason, Anna slamming her fist on the desk made me think of this.
I'm bolted to the wall!
I don't know why. We've got another name to toss on the pile of non-characters too, though at least Lubensky has been mentioned once or twice before in cutscenes and documents. He's the ship's conspicuously absent captain, and in order to find him, you're going to need to drain the flooded sections of the ship. It's a pretty quick run back if you know where to go, and I sort of did given the quickest way there mysteriously locks ahead of you, but I was facing a different sort of problem. I was running low on supplies. Between the enemies reaching across the entire ship to swipe at Hansen, god the range on some of those attacks is bullshit, getting stun-locked by this hook, and the storm literally bullying me up and down the deck, I was running low on health, and the constant combat encounters had me running low on ammo too. The first time I arrived at the pump room, all the gang of exocells had to do was slap Tom on the shoulder and he turned to dust. I couldn't even go back to the armory to resupply because the fucking thing exploded and gave me a heart attack, so I had to do a supply run back through the bowels of the ship, and let me tell you, without enemies to indicate you're going in the right direction, that place is a fucking maze. I'm pretty sure you have to go down there anyway, since once you activate the bilge pumps, every other door leading back to the hallway outside of the fish hold locks shut. That isn't a monster smashing the door out of shape, that's one of the devs desperately trying to railroad you down the intended path. And fair enough, because the next bit's fucking great. The hold is where the remainder of the Russian mercenaries have taken refuge. Hansen killed off most of the stragglers on his way into the ship, and the infected got the couple the team missed not long after, but this is where the rest have been hiding. Most of them are already infected, and they begin to turn the second you arrive. The hold explodes in a mess of violence, and you can add to that chaos by activating a trap the mercenaries set up to crush some infected they had chained to the pipes, or by setting off the numerous explosive barrels around the place. The hold is swarming with exocells and piled high with corpses for them to infect, so why not? You may not have started this fight, but you're damn well going to end it. It's the furthest from horror coldfear has travelled, but at least it's fun. Lubensky isn't among the dead, but it's not long before you find him too.
I found the captain. He's a corpsicle.
It's here that Bennett actually drops some forbidden lore about Hansen. Put a pin in that for later. But what I want to look at is a note that actually gives some details about the exocell infection. The way it mutates the host is pretty rote by this point. That's all fine. What's important is that it gives a time frame. Once an exocell gets you, you've got between 3 minutes and 2 hours to find a cure before you start to change. The average time to mutation is only 26 minutes. These things are fucking fast. Another note in an adjacent room reveals an antidote does exist, but it becomes useless once the parasite reaches the brain. So combine that with the speed of infection, and it's basically a dice roll on whether or not you can survive having one jump down your throat. And on the one hand, this does track with what we've seen. It does add to how threatening they are from a lore perspective. But it was also a massive mistake to give the player these numbers, because now fucking nerds, me, can actually apply them. So let's just take all that and put it in our pockets, save it for later, and keep on going. The infection must feel you're almost free of them, because the enemies are out for blood. They start busting through cryopods, smashing down doors, a couple even BM by attacking in the middle of a radio conversation, or on spawn before the room's even finished loading in. But it's a short run up to the captain's quarters, and there's not much they can do to slow you down. Anna doesn't waste any time setting a new course for the ship once you find the codes to unlock the autopilot. But we're not headed for the oil rig. We're on a collision course with Clown World.
Whoa, Anna, getting a little rough there. Hang on, I'll meet you at the pilot house.
No, it's not safe. Look, the seas are too rough for us to dock with the oil rig, yes?
What are you getting at?
The only way we can get on board is to climb up to the crow's nest and then jump when we get close.
Oh, crap. We're gonna hit the platform, aren't we?
That will make jumping easier, won't it?
You're out of your mind, woman!
And it's only now that the ship is minutes away from crashing into the rig that Bennett bothers to mention he'll be out of contact until Tom finds and destroys the radio jammer on board. Not that he seems too bothered.
Which means that until you take care of that jamming device, I won't be able to help you.
I'm heartbroken.
I'm serious, Hansen. The only way you get off that rig is if I help you, and I can't help you unless I can talk to you. So once you get on board, you smash that jammer, you got it?
Sorry, you're breaking up. I can't hear you.
Hansen! Hansen!
Just kidding.
Can't exactly blame him. All Bennett's done the whole game is piss and shit everywhere. I think I'll take my chances with the zombies. And boy, are there a lot of them. The game throws one last battle with the infected at you as you climb up to the crow's nest. And they're so desperate to bring you down with the ship that they start attacking you with QTEs. I didn't fucking know they could do that. And what follows is an absolute shitpost of a cinematic where the ship collides with the rig, Hansen flops between the two like a lubed up dildo, dives into the water when Anna doesn't make the jump, only to be immediately spat straight back out, and then this happens. Game? I'm just joking around. The cutscene ends and Hansen is fine. How much time has passed since he was infected? Who the fuck knows? The game never tells you and it doesn't matter. From a lore perspective, Hansen should be dead. The second the exocell climbed down his throat, that's it. Game over. But he's the hero, so of course he's fine. Who fucking cares? This is why you don't give people definite numbers. But it's not like anyone would even remember those documents after seeing this.
Made it! Anna, hang on!
This cinematic is like taking a flashbang straight to the retinas. It's so dumb, and the game only gets dumber from here on out. There were moments where Cold Fear sank into absurdity before this, the opening cutscene being a prime example, but it always managed to find its feet again. This is unsalvageable. It's jank from a story perspective, it's jank from a lore perspective, it's jank from a tonal perspective. It's just jank. The game may as well have ended there, because everything beyond this point is clown world from start to finish, which is the other reason I've only ever completed this game in one sitting. Cold Fear's second half just isn't very good. An opinion shared by most of the contemporary reviews. Ed Lewis spends the whole of his review gushing about the Eastern Spirit, even calling it the real star of the game, but his only reference to the oil rig is his disappointment at the lack of a map to help you get around. Impulse Games' review only had "it looks nice" to say about the oil rig. Daniel Weissenberger only brings it up in passing, or in regard to how underutilized the stormy setting is. In fact, he spends more time grumbling about how Cold Fear rips off Extermination, not Resident Evil 4, than he does mentioning the second half of the game. The GameSpot, official US PlayStation Magazine, and official Xbox Magazine reviews don't mention it at all, and the writer for PSM2 barely brings it up either. It's just not a part of the game that people find particularly compelling, even when reviewers did have a lot to say about it overall. One weird thing that kept popping up is that some reviewers referred to the over-the-shoulder aiming as first person, and... no? That's not first person, what are you talking about? I thought maybe this is what the game called it, and that's why they were using the term, but it doesn't. It calls it over-the-shoulder aiming. There is an option to aim without the over-the-shoulder view too, but that's called third person, so I'm baffled. I don't know what they're talking about. What the fuck do you mean this is first person? There were other common criticisms, of course. Lack of enemy variety being a big one, the poor performance on the PS2 port being another, the lack of an in-game map popped up multiple times, but otherwise people seemed pretty torn. I saw reviewers praising the gore, and others criticizing it. Some places really enjoyed Cold Fear. PSM2 even declared it the best zombie game on the PlayStation, for the time being anyway. But one thing most reviewers agreed on was the story is pretty bad. Weissenberger in particular tore the plot to shreds, and it's hard to blame him honestly. Quote, "Maybe all this would be bearable if there was an interesting story to hang all of it on, but sadly, that isn't the case. Also questionable is how little effort was put into making any of the characters plausible or coherent, and I'm not talking about the terrible, seemingly phonetic voice acting. There's a complete lack of normal human reactions from the main character. At one point, early in the game, Tom Hansen sees the dismembered corpse of one of his co-workers, with whom he's presumably worked for quite some time, and all he can think to say is that he's glad he found the code he was looking for on the man's corpse. I'm playing as a sociopath, or an amazingly one-dimensional character. Either way, it's hard to imagine why I'd be interested in seeing this man's story play out. Later in the story, he dedicates himself entirely to saving the life of a woman he's just met, seemingly just because that's what main characters do in video games. Maybe he's not so much heroic as impressed by the fact on a drilling platform in the North Atlantic the woman would wear a parka so small it only serves to provide a framing device for her enormous breasts. If there was a lower common denominator, the developers at Darkworks were apparently unable to find it." End quote. I don't know, man. Given where they started, this is practically nuanced. One thing that's been lost in the 2 decades since Cold Fear first released, including by me, is that while Resident Evil 4 beat it out the gate, for most of 2005 it was only available for the GameCube. The PS2 version wouldn't release until October at the earliest, and even the GameCube version hit the shelves after Cold Fear in some parts of the world. Through no fault of their own, Darkworks set Cold Fear up against the survival horror game of the decade, and then, by some quirk of cosmic fate, found the match rigged in their favour thanks to the high number of PlayStation 2 owners and Xbox-owning survival horror fans having fuck all else to play. What were they going to throw on instead? Dino Crisis free? No one deserves that. So for a little while at least, Cold Fear was the best big-budget horror game on offer in 2005. Indeed, reviewers even found a couple of things they thought Cold Fear did better. Revolutionary as it was, Resident Evil 4 hadn't yet abandoned the idea that you can't move and shoot at the same time. It was considered old-fashioned, especially since other survival horror games had introduced the technology to run and gun as early as 1999, so coldfear giving the option to do both at once was seen as forward-thinking. Another reviewer praised the ability to switch weapons without having to jump into an inventory screen and break up the action. Despite hating the game overall, Weissenberger actually accused Resident Evil 4 of ripping coldfear off. Yes, really. Quote, "If coldfear had come out a year after RE4, I would have called it an obvious rip-off, but it must have been almost completely finished by the time RE4 was released, which makes the similarities a little more suspicious. The theft would have had to have taken place while both games were in development. Since RE4 went through a very public redesign more than halfway through development, it wouldn't surprise me to learn that RE4 was the one cribbing from coldfear's playbook. If it's true, they can't be faulted too badly. After all, they did a much better job with the same basic elements." End quote. Which, as far as gaming conspiracies go, is a fucking whopper, far out. I mean, it wouldn't be the only place Capcom borrowed things for Resident Evil 4. Thierry Wynn, writing for the official US PlayStation magazine, didn't go that far, but did admit, quote, "Unfortunately, this game came out after the release of the phenomenal Resident Evil 4 on GameCube, and has been saddled with the unfair reputation of being an RE4 clone on a boat." End quote. So yeah, coldfear wasn't quite as dead on arrival as I remembered it being when I sat down to make this video, but it wasn't this overlooked gem either. Most professional critics saw it for what it was. Another survival horror game, something that probably endeared a lot less sympathy back at release when the genre was both oversaturated and stagnant. Its cult classic status isn't undeserved though, and people clearly enjoyed it enough that a GOG brought it back from the dead for the current generation to enjoy. The problem is, it's a cult classic for a reason. If it truly was on Resident Evil 4's level, it would simply be a classic. Something about it must not hit right, and I suspect a lot of the nostalgia surrounding coldfear only applies to the first half of the game set aboard the Eastern Spirit, because, as the reviews showed, there's just very little to say about the Star of Sakhalin, other than it feels like it's part of an entirely different game. It's not just the changes to level design that I mentioned before, or the dive in presentation now that we're on solid ground. It's like the relatively grounded setting of the ship almost acted as an inhibitor against Darkworks' stranger ideas, because waking up on the oil rig feels like a soft reset back to square one, and not for the better. To be fair, it starts off well. Having Tom walk off the transition between areas is a bit shit, but not exactly out of the ordinary for a video game protagonist. The starring cast of Resident Evil have all survived worse, but at least he did lose everything but his handgun in the chaos. That's right, your arrival on the rig is a full gear reset, which is a really good idea. Taking away the player's defensive options can be used to crank a game's horror elements up to 11 if done right, and I do really like the look of the place, how the ship is just sticking out of the side of the rig. It's still got atmosphere, even if it's not quite as compelling as the game's earlier sections. Pavel's warning proves true pretty quickly. The infected are lying in wait here too, and there's some sort of firefight going on in the distance. Worst of all, there are no extra weapons in the armory, which was annoying in the moment, but thinking on it does make sense. The survivors probably would just grab whatever wasn't nailed down to go fight the infected. They wouldn't leave anything behind in the event someone else comes along. It's kill or be killed out there. You don't have the luxury of looking out for strangers. Finding a cure among all that is going to be harder than I thought.
Stay back!
I'm with Anna. Help me.
You're alive. Good. There's only a little time to inject the antidote after infection.
Never mind. Guess I chewed the game out for nothing back there. Tom's fucking fine. Anyway, this is Pavel, Anna's friend. He looks like the guy from the monorail episode of The Simpsons. He sounds like a bad impression of Bartok from Anastasia, and he exists solely to deliver exposition. Well, that's a little unfair. He's kinda bummed Anna died, but they've got bigger fish to fry.
Maybe the drilling woke them up, eh? We were told to learn what they were and how to control them. But Kamsky went past that. He wanted to use them. And this is the result. It will kill us all.
Where's this radio jammer I heard about?
You're not a good person. And Pavel answers, but he also just walks out on the conversation, like he's so offended Tom just brushed the issue off. And then the second you leave the infirmary, this happens.
Ensign, one more thing.
Yeah?
You need to...
Okay, so this may come as a surprise, but Pavel getting sucked into a vent by nothing and then immediately spat back out is not the only other thing I remembered about the second half of the game. I saw this again with fresh eyes, and I fucking lost it. This sent me to the fucking moon. I laughed so hard I cried. I could not believe that made it into the finished product. This is not a horror game, this is a clown simulator. Something coldfear makes very clear moments later when you find replacements for your entire arsenal, plus a shiny new grenade launcher, before reaching the end of the fucking platform. You even get a new spear gun in the infirmary after your conversation with Pavel. Wow, they really had no money to work on this part of the game. They're not even fucking trying. It's at this point coldfear gives up on even pretending to be a horror game and it just throws you into action set piece after action set piece. There are security lockdowns where you have to hold back waves of enemies, firefights with surviving mercenaries, a game of cat and mouse with Pavel's killer, one of those slippery golem fuckers that eats AK-47 ammo and shits QTEs, rooms that exist only to show off environmental traps you can lure enemies into, like this massive oven that I didn't even use correctly, and a catwalk covered in bombs that will go off if you so much as look at them funny. This is another place where I got stuck. I had no idea what the game wanted me to do here because there's no way to maneuver through the field of explosives without catching a laser, and there's no way to shoot the bombs from afar because most of them don't exist. The second you hit the red, Tom bursts into flames. I went wandering back the way I came looking for a solution, but there was nothing to find. There's only one way forward, and that is to crouch beneath the lasers. What? What do you mean you can crouch? Since when? Were you ever going to tell me? Yeah, it's in the manual, but the mechanic is never tutorialized in-game, and almost never needed after this specific room either. Is that something you can use in combat? Can you duck under enemies and tickle their nuts? You think Leon can throw it back like Tom Hansen? Take that, Resident Evil 4. Anyway, then the game tosses you into one of its only boss fights, with the leader of the mercenaries, Anashenko. And get this, he even has his own character model. This must be serious. Did that guy drop his fucking head? He's not actually that much harder to kill than any of his men. A few bullets to the head will drop him quick enough, but it's certainly framed as a boss encounter. He's joined by a bunch of his mercenaries to try and pin Hansen down on the other side of the hold, and it's immediately preceded by a massive battle between the mercenaries and infected that you just crash over like a tsunami. You see what I mean about this not really being a horror game anymore? This is action thriller at most, but given Hansen comes off as more powerful than the allegedly unstoppable infected, this is more like a boomer shooter power fantasy than anything else.
Ugh.
Well, this really is Resident Evil 4. Anashenko's eye gets you into the jamming room, assuming you can even find your way back to it through this maze of steel and explosions.
Eyes only clearance, I guess.
The way it throws you right into another fight on spawn is a bit shit, but on the other hand, look at those CRTs! Destroying the jammers is tougher than it seems. You can't just shoot them and move on, you really have to smash the shit out of them to stop them working.
Bennett, you out there?
I can hear you. Give me your situation.
I'm alright, but Anna's missing.
Sorry about the girl, but there's bigger things to worry about. I need you to find Kamsky's notes. Our best guess is that they're on his laptop. Find those notes and upload them. With his data, we can make sure this never happens again.
But what about Anna?
Fine. Head to the main security room. It's a good place to start looking for those notes, and you might be able to spot your girlfriend.
She's not my girlfriend.
Oh, that's right, Hansen. You get your girlfriend shot, not eaten by monsters.
Back off, Bennett.
Whatever you say.
You know what? I'm starting to think Hansen is the problem. Bennett might be an arsehole, but he's just doing his job. Tom is the one making things way harder than they need to be. 10 minutes ago, he couldn't have given less of a shit about Anna, but now he's all, "Boo, she's dead." Fuck off. I'm starting to wonder if the rest of the crew of the Ravenswood dropped him off alone aboard the Eastern Spirit, put on a radio show like they were going to be ripped to shreds, and then fucked off home, happy to be free of him. Good riddance. Anything to get away from this schoolyard immaturity. Speaking of Anna, turns out she's not dead, actually. She didn't get spat out of the water like Hansen did, but she is rescued by this fucking thing, which we eventually learn is her father, Victor Kamsky. He's gone all in on his mad exocell science bullshit, and turned himself into a buff skeleton man, and he wants to share his new gifts with his daughter. Okay, yeah, that was kind of creepy, but the fact Tom just happens to see it on a security camera while passing through the guard room is a bit shit. And, of course, he immediately starts pissing and shitting everywhere about going to save her. Though, for once, Bennett doesn't immediately shoot down the idea. The exocell's weaponized, and the CIA with the only antidote. Just think of the potential. There's a lot of intrigue to mine here, but, again, I have to bring up the numbers. The numbers coldfear foolishly handed to me like I wasn't going to use them to slit its throat. So Anna's got 3 of these things inside her, at least. Humans can actually fit 7 exocells inside them according to a different note. Fucking 7 of them, what the hell? Where do they go? How do they fit? But let's just assume that doesn't exponentially increase the time of infection. She's still got, at most, 2 hours before she's a fucking zombie. Probably less. Probably less time than it'll take for me to finish articulating this point, and it's simply not realistic for Tom to get to her in that time frame. There's too much game between the two of them for him to find an antidote and get it to her before we hit the average time to mutation. But, you know, let's say for the sake of argument Anna's built different. She's rebellious and strong-willed, a real Russian woman. She is a woman. She can tank the exocell infection for as long as the game requires. How do we even know there's more antidote? Pavel never mentioned having any more. This is Tom just making shit up as he goes. And the worst part is, the journey down to find the thing is actually pretty good. The trip across the struts brings the environmental hazards back into the mix. And don't think I missed that fucking goop covering the habitation module game. I know what you're doing. That's an awful lot of explosive barrels for an empty room. Inside the hab, things are looking a little crusty, and it's even worse once you fall through the floor and drop right into an exocell hive to rival any necromorph infestation. You've gotta be fucking kidding me. Fine, fuck it. He's infected again. Why not? I thought it was abrupt the way Pavel just cured him 5 seconds after voring an exocell the first time, but who cares? Just do it again. I guess now it's a race to see who will explode into a goop monster first. Oh god, remember when this game was good? I still had 3 hours to go for this playthrough. But was it good though? Or was it carried by the environmental design? Lacking the puzzles and in-depth exploration of coldfear's survival horror predecessors, all it's really got to pass the time is combat. There's a decent roster of weapons to collect, though it's not like the classics where you need to bring the right tool for the job. A handgun is just as capable of popping off a zombie's head as a shotgun, possibly even more so given it comes with a torch and a laser sight. Tying the game's flashlight to certain weapons is definitely odd, but it does create a trade-off of sorts. The shotgun might deal more damage overall, but it's less precise, to the point you don't even get a reticule when aiming down sights. The MP5 and the Kalashnikov both have high fire rates, but have far less damage. The grenade launcher can one-tap most enemies, but at the cost of having to trick-shot the little bastards into range of an infected, which is next to impossible when they're zooming all over the place. And the flamethrower sucks, which is honestly pretty surprising for a game so obviously inspired by the thing, but as the manual explains, its range is only 6 meters, so enemies have to be right up in your face for the thing to actually work. This isn't a flamethrower, this is a Flame Dribbler. Fucking got him. It is useful against stationary targets like the exocell nests, but so are the explosive barrels that usually spawn in right beside them. In fact, you can accidentally blow Tom up instead if any of that fire happens to catch one of the barrels in the attempt. The only weapon I found to have any tactical use was the spear gun, which has a much higher range, usually bigger than any part of the environment at 100 meters, and will distract any enemies in the area long enough for you to drop a grenade at their feet. It can also be used to lure them into environmental hazards like the big oven I mentioned before, hard as that is to set up in the moment. Or you can shoot them at other enemies and cause a civil war. Still, I usually found myself defaulting to the handgun because of how good it was at catching enemies in the head. The other weapons I only ever turn to when seriously outnumbered or cornered by one of the special infected who don't have a cranium to destroy. Some of that I'm pretty sure comes down to how much easier it is to aim with a mouse and keyboard. I remember really struggling with the combat back on the PS2, something probably not helped by the shit performance if these reviews are anything to go by, though in fairness the remaster chugged like an old ocean liner at certain points too. Either way, the ease at which you can line up a headshot with a mouse trivialized most of the encounters. Combine that with the laser sight on the pistol, and it's no wonder it became my main. Something I learned from reading the reviews is that you can actually hold onto the railings around the ship to steady your aim while out in the storm. I didn't know you could do that during any of my playthroughs. There was never any need thanks to mouse look rendering the combat an afterthought, but it does show Darkworks did think about it. It's related to the resistance bar you can see pop up from time to time. It's a bit like stamina, given when it depletes, Tom loses his footing and goes slipping right across the deck. It can be run down by the rock of the boat or by taking damage, but honestly it was such a non-event during this current playthrough that I completely forgot about it. In fact, I've had to come back and add this bit in about it after finishing the script. A bit like with the camera though, I think some of the developers were too worried about giving gamers motion sickness than committing to the bit. Ammo was still a factor from time to time. It could get pretty tight after big encounters, but there was always the armory to trek back to if I ever needed a top-up beyond the pretty generous environmental drops. Now, just because it was easy a lot of the time doesn't mean it wasn't fun. Dropping enemies at a distance will never not be satisfying. However, I'd struggle to call it scary. Like I said, Coldfear feels closer to a power fantasy than a horror game, at least in terms of mechanics. Aside from the weapons, there are a bunch of environmental elements you can use to slow down the infected too. Valves, extinguishers, and fuse boxes all require some amount of player interaction to use, and they're just as capable of causing a game over if used poorly, but the rest mentioned in the manual don't even need a stray bullet. Waves and cables will just do their thing when you're out on deck, and after navigating the minefield on the oil rig yourself, you'll emerge to find infected throwing themselves into the lasers like they can't wait to be done with the game either. It's half-baked the way it is, but I could see how you could use these elements as a foundation for a combat system with some actual depth. The enemy variety does not help though. The reviews were right. There is nothing to sink your teeth into here. When the stationary exocell nests are treated like a whole enemy in the manual, something has gone wrong. Because, of course, all the enemies are dutifully listed in the manual, a trend I still don't really understand. Where's the sense of mystery? Why bother building up the introduction of the slippery golem fuckers or Misters Invisible when you're just going to slap them unobscured into the manual? One thing the enemy entries do reveal though is how 3 of the 8 guys you end up fighting are just men. Normal men. Well, not normal men, but certainly man-shaped. The only thing separating the mercenaries from the 2 zombie variants is a healthier pallor and the ability to wield a gun. And the only thing separating the 2 types of zombie, at least according to the manual, is the fact one is smarter and will spawn exocell parasites when killed. Now that last part is definitely true, but I never saw any evidence that they had any extra brain cells rattling around, especially once I was done with them. One thing I did notice is their range is vile. They can hit you from so far away, and sometimes they can even hit you after you've already killed them, which is very rude, but also something Resident Evil 4 suffered from too, so, you're off the hook for this one, Coldfear. for now. All the other enemies were just as bad on the range front. Tom Hansen has a damage box the size of the Eastern Spirit. All an enemy needs to do is sneeze in his general direction and his health bar will probably drop a few pips. I'm glad I only played on normal. I do not want to know what this combat system is like on extreme. I especially don't want to fight the special infected because they're all so jank. This was before Left 4 Dead codified the main roster of infected types, but they're all present here unbuilt anyway. The slippery golem fuckers are the hunters, the Misters Invisible are the smokers, and the chargers are... the tanks. They're the tanks. They look like chargers, but they play like tanks. And also like chargers. And I don't really have much to say about any of them. They are annoying because of how much punishment they can take, and how many of them the game starts throwing at you toward the end, but at least the slippery golem fuckers and the Misters Invisible can be countered with a well-played QuickTime event. They're not quite as intuitive as they were about to become in the wake of Resident Evil 4. In fact, they're pretty clunky, but if you land the shot at the end of the sequence, it more than halves the enemy's health. Sometimes it one-taps them completely, which incentivizes you to get jumped, assuming you have the patience to stick around for the fights at all. A couple of very late game encounters I just ran on by because I was sick of the combat and wanted to stop playing. But that's the weird thing about running into the special infected. The fights are either piss easy or drawn out slogs with no in-between. The charges aren't much better, but at least they come with an obvious weak point. Lure it into charging close to an explosive barrel and the fight will end even faster. There are also one or two bosses, but they're either no different from the regular enemy encounters like poor Anashenko, or they're so far removed from the regular combat loop that they deserve their own chapter of the video. Did I mention one of the only things I remembered about the second half of the game was the final boss? But probably the most interesting enemy in the game is the exocells themselves. Whether attacking in groups or spawned from the neck of a dead zombie, the second they show up, the encounter becomes a countdown to chaos. If they're in a swarm and get close enough to give Tom a little tickle, his health bar will drain away to nothing before you can get off a shot. And in a fight with multiple enemies in a corpse-rich environment, the moment they're exposed to the elements, they'll immediately start slinking over to a replacement to rejoin the fight. It takes them a couple of seconds to possess a new body, so you can stop them if you're quick enough, but in the middle of a fight with multiple zombies, it's surprisingly easy for them to get back up. They add an element of emergent gameplay to every encounter where they appeared, in ways the Los Plagas parasites from Resident Evil 4 never really did, even when they too began exploding out of enemy heads. Fighting off one zombie can suddenly turn into fighting off a whole group. Letting them get hold of a mercenary can take the heat off Tom, but turn the encounter into a freeway fight. There's a lot you can do with them, and best of all, they're actually kind of creepy. If you don't have the ammo to spare, you can stomp the heads instead, though it's missing something without the boom of the gun. We haven't quite got to Isaac Clarke going apeshit taking out his frustrations aboard the Ishimura yet, but you know, the foundations are there. The stomp isn't really viable in combat though. Instead, if you've got an enemy right up in your shit, you can shove them back a few steps to make some room. Though, given the range on enemy attacks, its efficacy was pretty hit or miss. Sometimes it didn't seem to work at all, and usually if an enemy got that close anyway, I was taking damage no matter what. Otherwise, you don't really have any defensive options. You can't even spam health kits because, again, the game has no inventory system. You can't pick them up, you can only use them, and you can't even rely on the infirmary supplies because, as I've said, they aren't infinite. They're a gift, not a crutch. Overall, the combat is fine, but it definitely starts to show its flaws in the second half where the environment plays less of a mechanical role. And it really should have too, because this is already pretty good. There's a lot of great environmental storytelling going on here. You can see the wreckage of the failed siege, and how the exocells smashed through the hab module like a tsunami, and I fucking love this guy up the back of the room Tom wakes up in. This is the other thing I remembered from the second half of the game, and he's great. He's like a first draft of the Human Reaper from Mass Effect 2. I wish there was more explicit horror imagery like him in the game, because while it has used the nautical setting well, it's not really leaned into the graphic tableaus you'd expect to see in a story like this. Part of the reason the trip through the hab module works so well is that up to this point, point, Coldfear has been pretty restrained, especially for a game made in the mid-2000s, but this is where the mask comes off. From here on out, it's hives of meat and run-down laboratories and mad science gone wrong, and it's amazing. There just isn't much you can do with it. The HAB module is over in about 10-15 minutes if you don't get lost, and there's no other area like it in the game. It's not like Dead Space or System Shock 2 where the infestation gets worse as you play on. It's just a single environmental set piece that looks great, but lacks the interactivity of the ship. You can find that optional room with another fucked up monkey man, so that's fun, I guess. There's a bit more in the abandoned underwater lab on the other side of the HAB module, but it's nothing we haven't seen before. There are Half-Life-esque experiments to perform that blow the enemies to bits the second you push the button, but are actually intended to kill you specifically, since one causes the worst sound ever recorded to play.
What do you know? Access granted.
There's your typical morgue jump scare. Yeah, go on then. Ah, shit. A monkey explodes out of a cage for some reason? Why does it have AK ammo on it? There's not a boss fight when you find the antidote in this very suspiciously boss arena-shaped room. You fight through about 7,000 special infected. Look, there's just a lot of combat in this section, which is why I think it's such a shame it doesn't do much to engage with the environment. Yeah, I did electrocute a couple of Misters Invisible in this one pool, but like, that's basic. That's not the same as luring an enemy into getting swept over the side of the ship. It just doesn't hit right. There are some notes to find, like a message from Kamsky talking about while Yusupov merely wanted to attack zombies, he hoped for something more. This is also the area where you find that note about the exocell life cycle that reveals human beings can take up to 7 of the fuckers inside them. I still can't believe that. It's so fucking many! Wait, who the fuck is Dr. Nikolai Kastagnev? There's a different note that reveals the serum only delays the onset of mutation by an average of 9 hours. So either way, I guess Hansen's fucked, unless the serum is different from the antidote, in which case the game just never specifies that. Thanks. And then you just find Anna like it's nothing.
I'm sorry, Anna. So this is it, Tom. 2 patients, 1 cure.
Hansen, move it! You've got work to do and you're running out of time.
I know. Let's make a deal. I get those notes, you take care of Anna. Get her out of here.
You play hardball, Hansen, but you got a deal.
Right. I'm on my way.
What the fuck do you mean? What are you doing, game? What do you fucking mean he's just fine now? What do you mean he's working for Bennett again? And where the fuck did Anna go? What the fuck is happening? How long was he unconscious? Is he a zombie now? I need you to make sense for a fucking second. Okay. We need to stop talking about the game for a second because I am fucking losing my mind over this. I'm so ready to rip the story to shreds, but I'm going to save it until we see how it ends so I can really give it the treatment it deserves. But this whole sequence of events, this can't be right. This can't be what Darkworks intended. When Anna gets in contact with Tom later on, he acts like she saved his life, but as far as the player is concerned, he cured her and then she just vanished. It feels like there's something missing, some bit of content that never made it into the final product, but was far enough along, even late into development, to keep reference to it in the dialogue. There is more to this than what's just in the game files, and I need to know. So let's take a look. Something that shouldn't be a surprise by this point is that Coldfear released blatantly unfinished. There are so many vestigial elements left in the final version that it's practically a menagerie of living fossils. The rig being so unpolished, the story bouncing between ideas and 10,000 characters who barely appear, the fucked up monkey men who only ever show up as corpses, even the arrangement of certain areas. Keen-eyed viewers may have noticed noticed the Human Reaper down in the HAB module is just Victor Kamsky from that cinematic with most of his bits missing, including, apparently, some of his textures. Is it just me, or is the game getting blurrier? And it makes me wonder if this section of the oil rig was originally meant to come before his proper introduction in that cutscene. On that particular matter, I guess we'll never know, but the concept art you can unlock by completing the game does reveal a lot about Darkworks' original vision for coldfear. One design aspect that didn't survive long into production was a much more Soviet style. Just look at that original logo. It's mostly absent from the finished product, only really popping up with Yusupov's model in his one appearance. And I wonder if it was only used because it was finished and they didn't have time to make another one better suited to the new visual style. It also seems as though a submarine would have played heavily into proceedings, maybe as a third area between the ship and the oil rig. Tom and Anna certainly went through a lot of different designs. Tom started off as a slab of meat with a shit haircut before Darkworks settled on the final, much better design. Like, far out the original version sucked. Though it does lend credence to the idea that the game started off as a Time Crisis sequel, something I read in one or two places, but was never able to confirm with an actual source. It would explain Anna's original designs too. She went through every variation of mid-2000s video game babe with bare legs, bare midriff, and tight catsuit spy clothing before ending up with her current look, which is probably for the best, though I do miss the blonde hair. A bunch of enemies ended up getting the chop, like the fucked up monkey men, which are apparently meant to be fucked up dog men, not beating the Thing plagiarism allegations there. There was also this guy, who in lieu of an actual name, I have dubbed Ballman. Look at him. Can't believe that got cut. There are some mutated ocean life that never made it into the game, like this weird shark, this buff crab guy, and a zombie seagull, plus this dog graboid hybrid thing? What the fuck am I even looking at? Anyway, my point is, coldfear went through a lot of different iterations during development, and if this is what Darkworks was willing to show the player, given how little of it is represented in the final release, imagine how much more must have been left on the cutting room floor. Why is this so threatening? Now, no game hits store shelves exactly as the developers intended, especially in the AAA space, but even so, coldfear seems to have had a rough time getting out the door. Aside from reading that it started life as a Time Crisis sequel, I've also seen it said that coldfear was then repurposed as another Alone in the Dark entry, since Darkworks had seen some success with the new Nightmare, but I couldn't find a source for that either. I'm not saying it's not true, just that I couldn't confirm it. One thing I can confirm though is that it was originally going to be published by Namco, before getting picked up by Ubisoft, so things were clearly a little choppy behind the scenes, even before it was shown to the public. A lot of time was spent getting the feel of the ship right. Claude Lavasta, in a GameSpot dev diary, notes how they wanted to get the pitch and roll of the ship as realistic as possible, which added on unforeseen challenges like how to stop the camera from clipping through the environment during a particularly violent wave, or syncing up character animations to the movement of the Eastern Spirit. Quote, "In coldfear, the characters spontaneously shift with the movements of the ship until the deck reaches a certain angle. At that point, they fall and begin to slide. While sliding, Tom can still turn back, stop himself from falling by catching hold of the hull, and continue shooting. To achieve the best possible visual quality, the characters' animations had to perfectly match the movement of the ship. The characters must shift and compensate in all directions, forward, back, left, right, and in all intermediary directions. Once you add them up, this gives us a total of 9 animations that have to be mixed together to create a movement that constantly follows the deck's angle variations. This required us to implement 9 times the animations that you'd find in the average third-person game. Even if we managed to use some techniques like inverse kinematics, we still have 250 animations for Tom, and 150 for some enemies, not including compensation animations. Our animators did a tremendous job to achieve such a result. The game engine manages the impact of the moving environment on all entities, compensation, fall, and slide. It's incredibly dynamic. Everything is rendered in real time, and even the corpses are still affected by roll movements." End quote. That full range of dynamic environmental interactivity seems to have been cut before release. Another GameSpot hands-on article mentions how items would slide back and forth across deck along with Hansen and the enemies, something they don't do in the final version. In that same dev diary, lead artist Arnaud Barros mentions how a lot of the environment elements on the ship, the lifeboats, the rigging, the waves, etc., were scripted, but over time were converted to physics objects to better match the realism they were aiming for. According to Antonin Delboy, great name, this was also done to free up memory, and oh god, this is starting to sound like Trespasser all over again. It might not be that far off the truth. It's hard to tell since as far as I could find there are no development deep dives or post-mortems for coldfear, but all signs point to some serious behind-the-scenes problems. Even once it found a home at Ubisoft, the publisher didn't seem that invested, given Brad Shoemaker noted in a different GameSpot preview that coldfear hadn't received much marketing since its announcement in 2004. A brief preview in the official US PlayStation magazine the same month of the game's release mentions how Ubisoft actually sent in Gunther Gallipo of Rayman and Splinter Cell fame to right the ship, as it were. Quote, "While the game has been in development for 18 months, he took an active hand during the later end of development and helped retune, and at times reconfigure, the game to what it is now. Originally signed by Ubisoft last year, coldfear was a pretty basic survival horror game. Coast Guard Hansen gets called to a boat and finds himself shooting up zombies. Yawn. Gallipo's goal was not only to add more action, but to make that action more tense and tactical. So, while you're still a Coast Guard dude checking out a zombie-filled boat, the actual gameplay is now significantly different. Gallipo's tweaks included interactive environments and a randomization of enemy behavior. Gallipo also created a new weapon, a spear gun that fires spears coated with a specific chemical that attracts the mutants. Gallipo's ultimate purpose is to create a rhythmic sense of gameplay, where the player's tense exploration and puzzle solving are punctuated with frantic tactical action that features emergent gameplay situations, rather than your standard canned scripted events." End quote. Whether or not Gallipo succeeded is probably down to personal preference. The shooting is decent and can be satisfying, but it also undeniably overwhelms the gameplay. That being said, if this is the best he could do at the end of development, it makes me think coldfear was in a really bad state before Ubisoft sent him in. I can't think of any examples in video games where a dev team sought help from an outside design consultant, or had one forced upon them by the publisher, that didn't also involve the production either being extremely late, well over budget, completely aimless, or some combination of all three. From the outside looking in, it seems as though they got hung up on making the ship work the way they wanted, to the detriment of every other aspect of the game, and they were right to do it. Even 20 years later, the first half of coldfear is incredible, but consider how much of an afterthought the story is, or how poor the oil rig comes off by comparison. Gallipo's last-minute touch-ups to the combat definitely salvaged whatever mess coldfear was in before Ubisoft threw him at the project, but they probably also took up whatever time and resources Darkworks had left to get it properly finished, and you can feel that here, in this scene, where Hansen saves Anna, drops dead, and is then just fine the second the cinematic ends. I've read that Darkworks originally planned to have a section here where you play as Anna, and have to search out or synthesize a new batch of antidote for Tom, but I've never been able to find a source on that either, so who the fuck knows. I don't doubt it though. You can feel how there's something missing here, how there's something missing from the rest of the game in fact. This is the moment where coldfear just collapses in on itself, and I know I already said it did that the second Tom jumped off the ship, but while it never completely righted itself, coldfear did manage to limp along for a couple extra hours. Past this point, it can barely crawl. I'm not saying Darkworks gave up here, but they definitely ran out of time, or money, or both. And it's a shame, because all the previews I dug up for the game seemed really excited for it. Darkworks had earned a lot of goodwill from the new Nightmare, as Francesca Reyes mentions in the official Xbox magazine. Coldfear didn't merely have to be a cult classic. It could have been something great, but whatever happened behind the scenes killed that possibility stone dead. That said, it didn't remain dead for long. For how much Cold Fear gets compared to Resident Evil 4, to me, it feels a lot more like Dead Space. I know Dead Space was originally envisioned as a System Shock 2 style RPG before Resident Evil 4 stepped onto the scene, but Cold Fear's environments feel like a prototype of the Ishimura's dark and dusty halls, right down to the fact that throughout the second half of Cold Fear, you'll be stopped periodically by quarantine alerts that require you to take out a wave of enemies before you can progress. The look of the meat moss growing on the walls and the very slight tactical dismemberment of the enemies both feel like spiritual predecessors to Dead Space as well. Plus, it left enough of an impact to get a modern remaster, and rightfully so. It wasn't easy either. The GOG team even posted a video about how much of a bastard it was to get Cold Fear running well on modern hardware, and even then, this recording is proof some gremlins survived the cull, but it was still worth it. The first half of the game is up there with the Raccoon City Police Department and Silent Hill as one of the best environments in classic survival horror. It's just easy to forget there's so much more to the game than that. As for Darkworks, this was, perhaps unsurprisingly, their final release. The company fought on for a few more years, they even began work on I Am Alive, but Ubisoft eventually took it out of their hands and left the company to die. It closed its doors for good in September 2011, and Ubisoft would eventually sell off both Cold Fear and I Am Alive, among other titles, to Atari in 2025, which is really disappointing because Darkworks clearly had talent. I wish I could play the game Cold Fear was meant to be, especially here, because we're all the way at the bottom now. There's no deeper into Clown World we can possibly sink. I mean, even the game wants to be over and done with itself. Whatever was meant to go between these fades, our next objective is clear. Bennett wants Kamsky's laptop, and Tom is fine working with him again because the plot demands it be so. The laptop is back in the habitation module, but you can't take the shortcut down the main elevator to retrace your steps. You have to loop across the entire oil rig to reach it again. Fuck off. This sort of thing wasn't too bad on the ship because the level design was so dense, but here on the rig, it's fucking insufferable. Even the set pieces start coming apart at the seams. I didn't even mention how one body you come across earlier can't be dealt with ahead of time because the game needs it for an explosion. But here at the bridge, I got fucked so hard by the camera, I couldn't retract it before the big guy made it across and promptly tossed me in the ocean. I did manage to pull off the bridge trick when I got back a few minutes later, but there's no great payoff or anything. The charger's brain is so smooth it'll just walk right off the edge. No further goading needed. At least you get confirmation that Anna saved Hansen off screen in the next room, but instead of plugging a couple of narrative holes, it just ends up opening new ones.
Tom! You alright?
Anna, you saved my life.
Just returning the favor.
Thanks all the same.
You need to help me destroy this place!
No, I need to find your father's notes. Once I do that, Bennett will find a way to get you out of here.
You die!
Probably, but you'll be safe, Anna. That's what counts. Goodbye.
Anna has the right idea wanting to destroy the rig. It's the first time she's actually lived up to her alleged reputation as a strong-willed woman, but Tom wanting her to hold off so he can go get Kamsky's notes for Bennett in exchange for an escape helicopter is just bizarre. Not because he can't make up his mind on whether to go along with Bennett's plan or not, but because Anna already knows there's another escape route in the form of a helicopter sitting on the helipad on the other side of the rig. She could just say, "Oi, Suka," that's how Russians sound, right? "We've already got an escape. Pull your head out your ass and come help me blow this shit to the bottom of the ocean." Though I guess him just talking over her and cutting the call short isn't exactly out of character from what we know of him. But to add insult to injury, the helicopter isn't even the only vehicle left on the Star of Sakhalin. There are these fun little submersibles docked at the very bottom of the facility. Cold Fear, you're making this way more complicated than it needs to be. And you want to know the best part? The only reason you have to take the long way back to the habitation module is so this can happen. I fucking knew this was a boss arena.
I found Kamsky's laptop.
Good work. Now, attach your headset to the USB port and start uploading the data.
I'm on it, Chief. Antidote file is incoming.
Got it. What's next?
Nothing. I'm pulling the plug.
Don't try to be funny, Hansen.
Hey, according to you, that file is all you really need.
You listen good, Hansen. You get that uplink working right now. I want that data.
You want the rest of this? Come get it yourself. Hey, is that offer to blow up this place still open?
Tom! Yes, of course!
Alright, plot thread over. Let's get back to blowing shit up. The last leg of the game is spent trekking down to the very bottom of the oil rig to pick up a stack of C4, and then setting it to blow on the way back. And you can tell the devs were running on fumes by this point because it's mostly just combat and running away. In fact, things are so truncated the game starts throwing out save points at every other room. The biggest surprise along the way is the arsenal, which is the only other area in the game where you have to crouch to avoid some laser tripwires. Dropping an invisible guy in here with you after picking up the C4 is pure evil too. Like, thank God I got the crit QTE on the first try. Your first stop on the way back to the heliport is the underwater elevator. The charges aren't set to detonate remotely, they will go off if you stick around, and you barely have time to get back through the door before things go pear-shaped. The explosions are absolutely worth it though. Coldfear gave up on being a horror game a while back, but these angles where you get to see the rig evaporating behind you are incredible. I fucking love it. And that's pretty much it. There is this half-hearted attempt at a boss fight with 2 charges in the cargo hold, but like at this point who cares? I kind of get the sense there was meant to be something more impressive here, but Darkworks just ran out of time again, though at least they function as enemies. The same cannot be said of the proper final boss.
Mission accomplished.
I'm near the walkway between platforms. There's a helicopter on the other one. They were repairing it when I left. If it's working, I can fly us out of here.
You learned to fly a chopper?
I had to do something with my time here.
Beautiful. I'm on my way.
Whoa, is that something cool? Never mind. The failed ambush is almost like a cognitive reset to make you forget Anna learned to fly a helicopter out of boredom while being held captive by a gang of mercenaries too. Like that's... If this hadn't been made 20 years ago, I'd be accusing Darkworks of using AI to write the story. This is too fucking much. It's like the game is trying to bombard me with plot holes and contrivances to make me forget how little of this shit makes any sense. And then Coldfear just runs out. Of what, you ask? Everything. All. It just runs out.
Tom! Just a few charges left to set.
Where do you think you're going with my daughter?
Papa?
I'll keep you covered, Anna. Do what you have to.
So this is the final boss, and design-wise, it's okay. It leans a little close to the tyrants from Resident Evil to really stand out, but I do like the skull face, and the shade of green does set him apart from the rest of the enemies. You don't have time to admire the craftsmanship though. The moment the fight starts, you have maybe 5 seconds to engage before Kamsky grabs Anna, and the fight is over. Oh, so you get his attention, and... Oh, it's one of those boss fights. I'm starting to understand why I remembered the battle with Kamsky being a jankstravaganza. There is no way to hurt the boss. Darkworks didn't have the time or money to program in any health for him. All you can do is distract him away from Anna while she sets the last few charges and hope he doesn't swat you off the side of the helipad when you get his attention. It is possible to avoid his attacks by running away from his raised hand, but that requires you to be able to see him coming. So you have to balance aiming down sights to catch the telegraph and running blind to put some distance between you and Anna. Given there is so much combat right before this battle, I was running low on ammo, and while there are a couple of corpses littering the helipad, you don't have time to loot them with Kamsky gunning straight for Anna, which also renders the spear gun, the flamethrower, and the grenade launcher effectively useless, because they either lack the range or the damage per second to drag Kamsky away from his goal. One way you can buy yourself a few seconds and preserve what little ammo is left is to run to the opposite end of the helipad from Anna when first distracting Kamsky and only shooting to get his attention when he gets too close to her. It does leave you open to getting bowled over. lot, but it does force Kamsky to spend more time plodding across the helipad. Once all 3 charges are set, that's it.
Get to the chopper. I'll hold him off.
Except not really. Welcome to Phase 2, motherfucker. Now what the fuck do I do?
This guy seems invincible. You're gonna have to make more.
Die, apparently. Holy shit, he was on me so quick Tom hadn't even finished bantering with Anna. And no, there's no checkpoint between phases. Why would there be? It's this game. So, jokes aside, what do you do in Phase 2? You still can't hurt him. You don't even have a definite goal to work toward, like distracting him from getting too close to Anna. The answer is actually pretty simple. The game just does a terrible job of communicating it to the player. All you have to do is goad him into grabbing you and complete the QTEs 3 times. Which seems easy enough until you take into account how much health he takes with every single hit, and how easy it is to get caught by those claws. To say nothing of the frustration that comes with having to complete the first phase of the fight over and over and over again. It's not enough to just hit the QTEs either, you've got to get the crit at the end too. But eventually, he will go down. The game has just enough life left in it to cough up one last cinematic.
I'll take care of this.
Papa, I'm sorry.
Goodbye, Papa.
And that's credits, baby. Wow. Like, it's kind of incredible that these 2 scenes are from the same game, right? Let's not gild the lily here. It was never great. But the quality of the storytelling in the first half of the game is 40,000 leagues above the writing in the second. The stuff on the ship felt like your regular survival horror fare, but the story told on the oil rig felt like a fucking YouTube poop. You can see the results of Darkworks' lack of time and budget just about everywhere in coldfear, but nowhere is it louder than in the story, which makes sense. Mechanics often take precedent over storytelling in games. Gears of War famously had its different levels designed and built in a vacuum, and only toward the end of development did Epic Games hire a writer to stitch them together into a coherent story. But that's not quite how coldfear feels. Some aspects of the progression path were clearly locked in ahead of time, so far ahead that they couldn't be removed when it became obvious the resources didn't exist to fit them into a new, truncated version of the narrative. Hansen's second infection and miraculous recovery are a perfect example of that, but there are others. The way he flip-flops between objectives or doing Bennett's bidding willingly screams to me that these quests were carved in stone early on, and then Darkworks were forced to figure out how to fit them together at a later date, while missing half the planned plot beats that were meant to go between them. It's why Hansen comes off as such a fucking weirdo all the time. Yet clearly a lot of stuff was written for the game. You can find Pavel's diary in the underwater lift when you go to set the C4, and it lays out all the backstory. Most documents in coldfear run a couple hundred words, if that, but Pavel's diary is closer to 1,000. A lot of effort was put into fleshing out all these nothing characters like Pavel and Yusupov and Anashenko, even Viktor Kamsky to some extent, but it's all just backstory. You never get to see any of it in action, and I feel like that was originally the plan because it's too consistent and well written compared to the present tense events of the plot. It's the same with the cast of thousands you're introduced to in the first 3 minutes of the game, who all die before you even see their faces. I said at the start of the video that I could see the game's introduction working if it just chilled the fuck out for a few minutes, and I stand by that. Having an opening hour where you and your fellow Coast Guardsmen get picked off by monsters one by one until you're forced forced to seek help from Bennett or Yusupov or Anna could be really intense, but the way it's all vomited at the player in the space of 180 seconds poisons the tone. You could create a really intense atmosphere of horror where the audience can't tell what's going to happen next because no one is safe, but Cold Fear either isn't interested in or wasn't able to do that. The thing about horror, even B-horror, is that the audience has to care. You can have your audience terrified for the lives of your characters because they're so invested, or braying for their deaths because they're such insufferable dipshits, but they do have to care, and the way Cold Fear presents its story, there's simply nothing to latch onto. Not even a lamprey could get into this shit. Never mind the fact so many of the characters are nothing more than names. The pacing of the story is way too quick to ever let the player get to know these people. Tom is an insane man, Bennett is an arsehole, Anna is a woman, and everyone else dies so quickly that they're closer to plot devices than actual characters. The thing is, the three characters who stick around do have a lot of backstory too. Well, maybe not Bennett, but Anna and Tom sort of do. Remember when Bennett brought up some of that forbidden Hansen lore?
Oh, that's right, Hansen. You get your girlfriend shot, not eaten by monsters.
Well, the manual has some more to add on to that too. Quote, once a hero, now disgraced. Hansen is happy to fade into the woodwork as just one more guy out there saving lives with the Coast Guard. All that changes when his vessel receives an order to rescue an abandoned whaling ship during a raging storm. What he finds there will reawaken the dying embers of his spirit, if it doesn't kill him first. End quote. Now, stereotypical as that may be, it is the foundation on which you could build a character arc. Hansen wanting to rescue Anna to redeem his past failure to save his girlfriend is a very simple way to tie those sides of his character together, but that's not what Cold Fear ultimately decided to do with him. It was probably the plan, but again, the game released unfinished, so we have this sociopath for our hero instead. About the only definite characteristic he has is that he can speak Russian. Speaking of Anna, the notes go so far out of their way to describe her as rebellious and stubborn, but that's simply not reflected in gameplay. She gets captured a lot, her one moment of agency where she saves Tom happens off screen, and her decision to scuttle the rig feels more like something demanded by the plot than an expression of her character. Otherwise, she plays no different a role than Bennett, just a quest giver sending Tom back and forth in search of some key item or another. Something I find interesting is that most of what we learn about Anna doesn't come from her. It's brought up in notes or letters from her father or Yusupov. Anna, as a character, is an empty void ascribed an identity by other people. One of the most blatant cases of tell don't show in video games I've covered. The only thing we learn about Anna from the woman herself is her prowess behind the controls of a helicopter, and it comes so far out of nowhere that it feels like another narrative contrivance more than a natural bit of character development. Out of the three, Bennett has the most consistent characterization given he's the closest thing to a present villain we've got, but even that gets cut short when Hansen brushes him off and ejects him out of the plot alongside the USB stick in Kamsky's laptop. I guess they could have brought him back for a sequel, but come on, that was never happening. He's not even that antagonistic, given he's reliant on Hansen to do his dirty work right up until they're falling out. And yet, again, I can see all this working. I can see how the pieces fit together as a horror game, and as an action game. I can see the epic Darkworks wanted to create through all the weird little vestigial plot elements left in the game, but Cold Fear just makes the wrong decision at every single story beat. Many years ago, a friend and I tried to write a novel together. It was about a secret prestige organization of assassins. Think John Wick, only shit. John shit. And we would alternate between chapters. He would write one, I would write the next. You get the idea. But instead of crafting a coherent story, all we did was try to sabotage each other. He killed off a character I liked, so I brought them back through their up to that point unmentioned twin. I came up with a character he fucking hated, so he kept trying to turn him into a monster whenever I wasn't in control. We'd flood every chapter with names. Not even characters, just names to to use for later, and usually they'd all end up dead and cleaned out of the narrative by the end of the next section. It was a fucking mess, and that's what coldfear feels like. Two writers fighting for control of the narrative plot beat by plot beat. Like, the thousands of named characters who don't appear, the way Hansen gets infected, immediately cured, infected again, and immediately cured again. Hell, even his schizophrenic characterization. I don't know how else to describe it other than a train wreck, which is, incidentally, the name of that novel my friend and I tried to write. We knew what we were doing. But probably the biggest narrative mistake coldfear makes is ever leaving the boat. Even setting it on a relatively small whaling ship severely limited its potential. Had it been a massive cruise ship a la Deep Rising or Resident Evil Revelations, or even Tomb Raider 2 repurposed into an exocell research vessel, with lots of different areas to explore and more opportunities for dense level design, the game could have held on to its most compelling mechanical elements for a lot longer than it did. As I've said time and again, nobody remembers coldfear for the oil rig, but I'd also forgotten how little time you spend on the Eastern Spirit. On the whole, coldfear's story has a lot of problems, but I can see how you could make it into something good, maybe even great. The pieces are all there. It sticks too closely to the nautical horror formula for it to be completely sunk, but it didn't get the time and money it deserved. Coldfear may not have ever stood a chance against Resident Evil 4 on mechanics alone, but there does exist another world where it could have held its own in terms of narrative, and the urge to just write out a full fic on how I think it should have gone is overwhelming. So clearly it's got a spark of something, but as it is, yeah, the story is definitely not the reason coldfear is remembered as a cult classic. So, to bring us out of this storm at a long last, what is? Well, it's an obvious answer, but it's the ship, the section of coldfear set aboard the Eastern Spirit, and I cannot express enough just how small a section of the game that is the reason it's remembered so fondly 20 years later. It's the reason GOG brought it back from the dead, and why you still have people like me going, oh yeah, I remember that game. It wasn't great, but it had some amazing moments. Indeed, I can't think of a horror game that's done a ghost ship caught in a storm as well as coldfear, probably because it's too much time and effort to get right, but for all the problems Darkworks faced on coldfear, they did it. They pulled it off. And the results are just as impressive today as they were back in 2005. If they'd been given the opportunity to touch up the second half of the game set on the oil rig, or sold enough copies to justify a sequel, or that film adaptation had actually happened, it's possible coldfear could have grown into something great, but alas, that didn't happen. Still, while it wasn't a herald of things to come, it did give the classic style of survival horror a send-off worthy of the genre. It may not have turned out exactly as Darkworks would have liked, but that's the thing about cult classics. They're not perfect, yet people love them anyway. If coldfear was indeed the last title in the golden age of survival horror, I'd say it ended on a note. A C note. A high C note. Look, it doesn't matter, video's over, thanks for watching. And that's the video. If you enjoyed it, please consider watching some of my other stuff, or posting it around for other people to see. YouTube has definitely buried the channel, so any engagement is extremely appreciated. Please and thank you. But before I go, I'd like to thank by name the people supporting me with $5 US a month or more on Patreon. Anonymous, Abriel, Azazel, Cass, Hawkwing2652, Heymatey, Heavy, Jeffiet, Jeff Ladd, Kim, Operator Error, Paranoid Android, Reaper2122, Colonel Jericho, Sminglis, Sarah Bloomer, Smorsky, Sneezy McGlassface, Space Quest Historian, The Official 476, This Sauerkraut, Thomas Angel, Thomas Elliott, Tree3 Angry Bees, Ursa, and Zeke the Phantom. Thank you so much. This video and everything I make for the channel is now made possible by their generous support, so if you like what I do and want to see more, please consider donating. Ko-Fi is also an option if you can't support monthly. Links are in the description. Thanks again for watching. Please. Please. Please! Please!